Before things get out of hand, reading from an older essay by Anna von Reitz at annavonreitz.com. It's 10 pages, so it'll go on for quite a while. It is crucial that everyone understand the basic structure that was created by the founders and which has endured ever since. There are two entities called the United States. The continental United States, comprised of 50 geographically defined nation states acting as a federation. And in parentheses, the United States of America was never a sovereign nation, just a business association, folks. It's the land-based states that are separate sovereign nations. In the federal United States, comprised of 57 states, the 50 federal states plus the federal territories and possessions, which are counted as states of their union, which is supposed to operate exclusively in the international jurisdiction of the sea. The continental United States equals 50 separate nation states operating as a nation on the land jurisdiction. Federal United States equals 50 incorporated franchise of the United States of America Incorporated operating the international jurisdiction of the sea, plus 7 nation states, Guam, Puerto Rico, etc., operating as the United States of America Minor, for a total of 57 states. That is the way it is and the way it's always been. The federales and their federal state agents are not supposed to be trespassing on our land jurisdiction, except to serve and take care of and monitor their own citizens and attending to their duties as contractors. The confusion and the fraud began in earnest in 1911 when banks operating as a private association of banks, deceitfully calling themselves the Federal Reserve, bought the United States of America Incorporated, a governmental services corporation, and took over the agencies of the federal United States. They literally bought such familiar agencies as the United States Department of Transportation and began operating them as subcontractors without telling anyone. They then proceeded to pull off a criminal fraud gambit against the whole nation and eventually the entire world, beginning with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 and continuing through the 1933 bankruptcy of the United States of America Incorporated to the present day. The United States, defined as the District of Columbia et al., went bankrupt in 1933 and was declared so by President Roosevelt in Executive Orders 6073, 6102, and 6111, and finally is consolidated in Executive Order 6260. See Senate Report 93-549, pages 187 and 594 under the Trading with the Enemy Act, 65th Congress, Session 1, Chapters 105-106, October 6, 1917, and is codified at 12 U.S.C.A. 95A. The several federal states of the Union, purely incorporated political fictions created as franchises of the United States of America Incorporated, represented by their respective governors, pledged the full faith and credit of their states and their citizenry to the aid of the national government, represented by the United States of America Incorporated, and formed numerous committees such as the Council of State Governments, the Social Security Administration, etc., to purportedly deal with the economic emergency caused by the bankruptcy. These organizations operated under the Declaration of Interdependence as of January 22, 1937, and published some of their activities in the Book of the States. The reorganization of the bankruptcy is located in Title V of the United States Code Annotated. The explanation at the beginning of 5 U.S.C.A. is most informative reading. The Secretary of Treasury was appointed as the receiver in bankruptcy. See Reorganization Plan number 26, 5 U.S.C.A. 903, Public Law 94-564, Legislative History, page 5967. As a bankrupt loses control over his business, This appointment to the office of receiver in bankruptcy had to have been made by the creditors, who are foreign powers or principals. As revealed by Title 27 U.S.C. 250.11 and elsewhere, the Secretary of the Treasury being referenced is the Secretary of the Treasury of Puerto Rico, an officer of the federal United States who is designated as the receiver in bankruptcy to the foreign creditors, which are banks. The United States as corporator, 22 U.S.C.A. 286E, the state, quote, state, CRS 24-36-104, CRS 24-60-1301H, declared insolvency according to 26 IRC 165G1, UCC 1-201, so paragraph 23, CRS 3922, 103.5, Westfall versus Braley, 10 Ohio 188, 75, I don't know this annotation, AMDEC 509, Adams versus Richardson, 337, Southwest 2nd 911, Ward versus Smith, 7 Wall 477. A lot of those designations I don't know, but we'll put the link to this article in the links below so that you can read along and get a hold of these references. A permanent state of emergency was instituted within the Union, and the Federal Reserve has acted as the fiscal and depository agent of the creditors ever since. Please note that the member banks of the Federal Reserve are all privately owned corporations, 22 U.S.C.A. 2286D. The government, by becoming a corporator, see 22 U.S.C.A. 286E, lays down its sovereignty and takes on the character and status of a private citizen. It can exercise no power which is not derived from the corporate charter. See Bank of the United States versus Planners Bank of Georgia, 6L Ed 9 Wheat, 244, U.S. versus Burr, 309 U.S. 242. The corporate charter adopted by the federal corporation, aka U.S. Corp., included the Constitution of the United States of America as its bylaws, which of course, as bylaws subject to change and interpretation just like any other corporate bylaws, the Constitution of the United States of America also remains as a public commercial contract which is being traded upon by corporations claiming to be successors and holders in due course of the original contractual agreement known as the Constitution for the United States of America. Okay, I've stopped. I don't know these. This is where James Traficant comes in here. I do not know how I found this. It just came up in a search and it said Audubon Rights and I clicked on it. I didn't find it any other way. And I was searching for I think I was searching for something, the guy that's on those new what's going on. Yeah. He gave me a number to search and up came this.
A number?
He gave me a number in the code to search and I searched it and up came Anna's article, this one, Before Things Get Out of Hand. Oh. I don't remember ever seeing it. And I've never read it. So that's what I'm reading, but it has a lot of the references he was giving in that show that I just watched yesterday. So this Traficant reference is coming up. The real party in interest in the bankruptcy proceedings is self-evidently not the de jure United States of America or state, but the bank and the fund. 22 U.S.C.A. 286, sequence CRS 11-60-103. These acts committed under fraud, force, and seizure are many times done under letters of marque and reprisal, i.e. recapture, see 31 U.S.C.A. 5323. In behalf of foreign governments at war, this is an important point to remember as this discussion goes forward in time. On March 17, 1993, on page 1303 of Volume 33 of the Congressional Record, Congressman Traficant stated, "Mr. Speaker, we are now here in Chapter 11. Members of Congress are official trustees presiding over the greatest reorganization of any bankrupt entity in world history, the U.S. government. The U.S. government is the government domiciled in the District of Columbia, which at various times purports to represent three distinct entities. The U.S. corporation formed as we have just seen, and as documented at Title 28, 3002, 15 A, B, and C. The continental United States, defined as the 50 states united, a confederation of separate nation-states operating the land jurisdiction, and the federal United States, defined as the District of Columbia, Guam, Puerto Rico, Italia, along with the corporate franchise federal states set up in each of the land-based states." In this comment, Congressman Traficant was including all three primary meanings of U.S. government, as the term general government or U.S. government with a capital G is traditionally used in the congressional record when this meaning is applied. However, and this is the supremely salient point, there is no indication that the several, now 50 states united, were ever bankrupted, especially as presumed voluntary adjuncts. FDR and his buddies pulled this semantic deceit of all time. The actual entity in bankruptcy in 1933 was the foreign government of the federal United States, allowed under the Downs and Bidwell decision and several other Supreme Court cases known as the Insular Tariff cases circa 1900 to 1904. Like South America, these federal states can claim to be American, and they can form a union of their own, and they did so. They've been operating as the United States of America minor and as a constitutional democracy since the 1980s. The problem with a constitutional democracy is that if 51% of your neighbors want to eat you for breakfast or steal your home, they can do so. That is the form of government operating in the federal United States. Now, we the people inhabiting the continental United States are owed a republican form of government which upholds the sacred rights of individuals and abhors mob rule. Therein lies the rub, that the gross deceit involved in having two separate nations operating under the same umbrella by the same group of people, the United States Congress, and under virtually the same name. Often the only way you can tell the two entities apart is the word "the." It's the United States of America, major, and the United States of America. One's got the first letter capitalized, and one has the first letter of the as lowercase. Using the same name, United States of America, allowed a great deal of self-interested confusion and corruption, including confusion at law. Its immediate effect during the onset of the bankruptcy of the federal United States was to transfer control to these states and completely, by semantic deceit and misrepresentation, the de jure continental United States too, as they appeared to be named as parties to the bankruptcy, into the hands of the creditors, the Federal Reserve banks, and later IMF and IBRD, and their agents administering the bankruptcy under the authority of the Secretary of the Treasury of Puerto Rico. The perpetrators of this plot deliberately misrepresented their employers, the landed states, and the continental state citizens as voluntary sureties for the debts of the bankrupted United States of America Incorporated, without telling us one word about it, without making any clear and honest disclosure of the circumstances, without even admitting that an international banking cartel had interjected itself as a middleman between the actual states and people who pay all the bills of the federal United States and the agencies responsible for carrying out the duties owed. This misunderstanding on purpose allowed the banks to loan the perpetrators vast sums of credit, which the bank created out of thin air, merely by entering numbers on a credit ledger based on the assets of all the states, continental and federal, and all the people, continental state citizens and federal citizens too. All this credit made available to the United States Congress was based on hypothecation of the perpetrators' debts against the assets of the states and their, quote, citizenry. Hypothecation is a stealthy process by which the perpetrators pretend that a third party has, quote, volunteered to stand good for the loan for one of the originators. Think of co-signing a car loan for your cousin Billy Bob without ever being told that you and your property were ever offered as collateral backing his debts. The bank quietly takes a lien against your property on the presumption that you have agreed to pay the bill for Billy Bob if he doesn't pay off his own loan. That is exactly what the Federal Reserve did in 1933. It placed maritime salvage liens against every, quote, person and real asset in America, securitized them, that is, placed a dollar value on you and your land and your state, and loaned the Congress all sorts of vacuous credit based on your assets and your labor. Another way to imagine this situation is to assume that a big corporation with lots of franchise operations, say something like Burger King or Sears, went bankrupt and offered its customers and their assets as collateral backing its debts. The colluding Federal Reserve banks eagerly agreed to this scheme, full well knowing that none of the supposed sureties had been informed under conditions of full disclosure and consent. They did it anyway in criminal collusion, and the result now is fully recognized under the doctrine of odious debt. The supposed debt owed by the states on the land and the American people was created by blatant criminal fraud, of which they were aware and from which they were unaware, the American people were unaware, and they did not profit. The proceeds of this cozy arrangement between the Congress, the government agencies, and the Federal Reserve banks were poured into whatever projects the banks and their puppets in Congress wished to pursue for profit, such as the entirety of World War II and all the nasty, unjustified wars for profits that the, quote, United States has engaged in ever since. The people never received even the goods and services they contracted for, but all expenses related to this fraud scheme were nonetheless charged off to their account and held against their labor, assets, their land, their homes, their vehicles, even their body parts. So folks, odious debt is debt of exactly the kind described above, and neither the continental United States nor the people living on the 50 states are responsible for it. The corporations and the institutions and corporate officers who created and benefited from this mess are 100% liable, and we are not obligated to care if they like it or not. It's their mess and theirs alone. Furthermore, they are not allowed to use credit and assets that they purloined and siphoned off from the continental United States and the people to pay all the debts they authorized above and beyond the 19 enumerated services they were supposed to provide the states under the original equity contract known as the Constitution for the United States of America, a completely different kind of document apart from the deceptively and similarly named Constitution of the United States of America. These hyenas siphoned off the vast credit created by the labor and resources of the continental United States and the people on the land and passed it on to secondaries, which they named as our fiduciaries, conveniently without telling us, and instead telling us, the rest of the world, that we are bowed under by a vast $20 trillion national debt. Their corporation no doubt owes us a $20 trillion credit, which they're trying to avoid paying by shuffling their assets to collaborators and seeking bankruptcy protection for themselves. But we are on to their ploys now and heading down the home stretch. We know where the credit side of the national debt went, and we have filed UCC1 claims to tell the rest of the world the truth. We know the lies and chicanery that the banks and the members of Congress engaged in, and the false, unauthorized misrepresentations that these criminals made on our behalf, supposedly, while pretending to represent us. We are now presenting ourselves. To bring things up to modern times, the Federal Reserve Association bankrupted the Federal Reserve System, incorporated in 2009. Prior to that, the colluding banks and government agencies divvied up the spoils. The Federal Reserve kept liquid assets, land, and human chattels, and gave hard assets, gold, to the World Bank IBRD as their share. Then in 2011, China remembered that the Federal Reserve Bank of New York was holding a large stash of nationalist Chinese gold from 1928 that had never been returned, so they raised their hand about the gold owed and the interest on that gold. This made everyone else remember the German gold held by the same bank, and hey, what about the gold confiscated from Americans by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his thugs? And so the hunt was on, and the World Bank IBRD now were and are in the most uncomfortable position of being in receipt of stolen goods. Gold stolen from us and many, many others over the last 150 years. The Federal Reserve was on the hot plate too, and still is. Money and credit don't just disappear, though the bankers would like us to believe that they do. In a debt credit system, there is a credit created somewhere for every debt, and we, the American states on the land and living people domiciled upon those 50 states, are the priority creditors of this whole shooting match. The witless thugs in Washington, D.C. right now are intent on saving their bacon, somehow retaining their ability to create and borrow more and more and more money out of thin air, and continuing to charge it all off against the labor of the American people. They haven't realized yet the game is up, but the bankers have. Yesterday, March 18th, it was reported that the IMF and China are discussing making yuan the international reserve currency instead of the dollar. Please bear in mind that the U.S. Treasury is the IMF, which is an agency of the United Nations Corporation, styled as all caps. See Presidential Documents, Volume 29, Number 4, page 113, and 22 U.S.C. 285 to 288. Read that as the U.S. Treasury is talking to China about buying into the BRICS alliance and accepting the yuan as the new international reserve currency to do it. Once again, as always, the rats in Washington are intent on selling the American people out in order to preserve their own hegemony and to avoid paying their own debts to the actual creditors, us. It isn't going to work because too many people know the truth now. More are learning every day. The days when the good old boys could go to Jekyll Island and secretly plot the downfall of our nation for their private benefit are gone. No matter what they do, we know who they are, we know what they have done, we know how they operate, we know all their tricks and excuses and relationships with other corporations and criminal syndicates, and they stand utterly exposed. Pope Francis recently announced that the International Year of Jubilee will begin on December 8, 2015, that is 74 years and 1 day after Pearl Harbor. This is an ancient Hebrew practice. Every 70 years, all debts were forgiven, and those who lost their ancestral land through indebtedness were allowed to return and reclaim it. That is a big step in the right direction. However, it is not truly equitable and does not solve the continuing problem of operating governments as corporations. All these various governments on earth are incorporated entities with a very few exceptions, like the governments of North Korea and Iran, and they are all incorporated as governmental services corporations under the auspices of the Holy See and the Vatican. The majority of these governmental service corporations, especially those associated with the British Crown, have knowingly functioned as criminal syndicates and have preyed upon the people they are supposed to serve. By the Pope's own published laws and rules, they must make amends, and they must come into compliance with their charters, or they will be liquidated and their assets will be distributed to their creditors. Period. So what happens if the current brand new kid on the block calling itself, quote, the United States of America Incorporated, styled as all caps, and being operated by a newly reconstructed Federal Reserve, styled as all caps, being operated as a franchise of the United Nations corporations, also styled as all caps, is just more of the same old rubbish, as it appears to be. Then the pathways lead to Rome once again. We must make these facts and circumstances absolutely clear to the county boards and the state legislatures and the governors of these federal states so that they have a clear view of what has gone on here, so that they have no excuse for failure to understand the situation, and so that they recognize their obligation not to a mostly foreign-owned for-profit governmental services corporation, but to the land jurisdiction and the people who have been so outrageously abused. First, they must stop usurping upon the land jurisdiction and pretending that Americans of the land jurisdiction have voluntarily accepted the status of federal citizen. Nobody we know volunteered to give up their birthright status in the guarantees of the original Constitution in favor of debt slavery to foreign commercial corporations. Second, they must honor the equity contract they are trading upon, the Constitution for the United States of America, which includes honoring the Bill of Rights, providing lawful money for the use of the states on the land and their inhabitants, facilitating the people's access to their resources in their own common law courts without obfuscation or delay, ceasing all false claims of indebtedness against the property and assets of the people who employ them, and immediately correcting the citizenship status of all the continental United States citizens who were hoodwinked by the endless semantic deceits and fraud schemes. All American state citizens who have been convicted of so-called victimless crimes and statutory infractions and who claim their birthright status upon being fully informed must be released from federal prisons and federal state correctional facilities. Third, they must reveal all the slush funds and pockets of credit and accounts that they have secreted away from public view via operation of a dishonest government accounting system. The Governmental Accounting Office has been operating under a double-entry bookkeeping system popularly known as keep two sets of books. This was a system pioneered by Al Capone's accountant Easy Eddie O'Hare. That should be enough to tell you what kind of bookkeeping it is and why the Governmental Services Corporation has brought it back to good old common everyday accounting. What they have done is simple enough. They have separated income into budget and non-budgeted income streams. Then they cobble up a budget portion and let people fight over that, while the bulk of their income never sees the light of day. They have also indulged in crazy accounting factors, such as calculating how much debt they will owe on a pension fund 30 years from now and claiming that as an expense this year. The net effect is to hide vast amounts of investment wealth and real asset wealth from the people it actually belongs to, while the rats continue to pour mouth about budget deficits that don't exist in reality. Fourth, there must be an end of the harassment of the American state citizens under false pretenses by the IRS, FEMA, NHS, etc., and the federal state courts. We are not under their jurisdiction and never have been. Any pretense that we are is merely criminal self-interest and profit extortion on their parts. We have acted in good faith and shared our resources unstintedly with the federal citizens. And it is now time for them to move over and let us get on with our business, which includes running our own state court system, our own law enforcement, our own sheriffs, our own law guilds, etc. Fifth, anyone who wants to exercise the powers of public office must actually occupy that office, That includes taking the proper oath of office as a deputy, not a representative. Deputies are true fiduciary agents operating under full individual and commercial liability. They stand behind their actions in behalf of the public, and if they fail their duties, their own protection is the bond placed in behalf of that office. All these people who are now occupying federal, state, corporate offices that are merely named the same or similar names as actual public offices have no authority to do anything, either to or for anyone outside the narrow confines of the corporation itself. It should be crystal clear to all that J.C. Penney employees, it should be crystal clear to all that J.C. Penney employees are not allowed to go onto private property and evict people from their homes. It should also be clear that nobody but Walmart employees are obligated to obey the policies, procedures, rules, and regulations of Walmart Incorporated. In the same way, we are not obligated to obey federal state courts about any matter whatsoever, and we are only obligated to obey federal courts when the subject matter involves their jurisdiction or a crime took place on federal property. This is true now, and it has always been true. The rats have finagled to misrepresent us as one of their citizens instead of honoring our true birthright status, because this enabled them to continue their false claims of indebtedness against us and our property. They have been loath to admit the truth and stand down, but that is what is required of them. They must make the honest effort, to determine the birthright status of each and every man and woman, and those who were born on the land of the American states must be accorded their due. Now, when the options are fully disclosed and the jurisdictions are made plain, each man and woman is free to choose whether they wish to operate as a state citizen on the land or as a dual citizen of the United States. Your ability to contract is unlimited. If you want to agree to be a debt slave and donate all your labor and property to a mostly foreign-owned for-profit corporation, there is nothing stopping you. If, however, you wish to retain your birthright status, and that is what you are owed, and any pretension otherwise is a violation of human rights of the worst kind. One of the peculiar truths is that the federal United States operating our international jurisdiction of the sea has been at war since the outbreak of the Civil War. All their personnel ultimately operate under the Lieber Code, which baldly declared, Article 40 and 41, that all laws are suspended, and they are all prosecuted under martial common law. That is, the other draconian law form that has been misapplied to American state citizens as part of this gargantuan fraud scheme. Administrative law, statutes and regulations, that is the only internal law of the corporation or corporations involved. And secondly, martial common law. That is what is called special admiralty or executive admiralty. It is the international law of war, and in these so-called courts, the perpetrators of the fraud drag innocent American civilians in on the pretense that they are enemy combatants or prisoners of war and proceed to do whatever they like to them. This is the source of the gold fringe flag in the federal and federal state courtrooms. This practice of claiming that continental United States civilians are instead federal citizens has resulted in systemic chronic war crime and abuse of the civilian populace on a vast scale. It is a terrible infraction against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and against the universal right of self-declaration, both of which the federal United States is obligated to honor, but even more important, it is a violation of the Geneva Convention Protocols of 1949, Volume 2, Article 3, which makes it a war crime punishable by death to change the nationality of civilians. Please note that President Andrew Jackson 3 times publicly declared the continental United States to be at peace. He admitted that the land jurisdiction is at peace, and it has been at peace for 150 years. All the living inhabitants of the land are known to be civilians, and the military full well knows that the civilian authorities, meaning the people on the land operating their nation states, are the only ones competent to direct the American military under the American system. As stated in the beginning, the United States of America is a federation of actual nation states and has never been a sovereign nation. The federal United States operates a foreign international jurisdiction of the sea that has no right or reason to be involved in the affairs of the continental United States on the land. The United States of America Incorporated, the United States, styled as all caps, Incorporated, and the United States of America Incorporated, also styled as all caps, are all big commercial corporations and in nature and status are no different than any other corporation. Think Exxon, think GE. It follows that the only entities competent to declare war are the individual states on the land, as they are the only nation states present here, and also that the only civilians present competent to direct the armed forces of this country are the citizens of the United States of America, that is, citizens of the continental United States who are serving as properly sworn deputies of the states, not employees of any federal corporation, and not federal state citizens either. When the president, quote, isn't a natural-born citizen of the continental United States acting as a duly sworn deputy of the United States of America, when he or she is a bar association member accepting the title of Esquire, which is forbidden under the original equity contract, or who adopts dual federal citizenship, also forbidden, and ceases to be a fiduciary officer of the continental United States, he has no right to command any American state citizen to do anything, much less command them to go to a foreign country and kill people. It isn't possible for a federation of states to act as a sovereign nation, nor is it possible for a corporation to declare war except in fanciful and euphemistic terms, period. No member of the United States Congress has acted as a lawful deputy of any of the continental United States since the Civil War. Therefore, nobody in Washington, D.C. since that time has had the right to declare war on behalf of any state of the Union. No commander-in-chief has any lawful standing to declare war as a result of Congress's inability to do so. Every single war and action declared since 1860 has been a police action, and there's no reason nor is there any basis for Americans to tolerate this circumstance any longer. Our sons and daughters have been sent to slaughter in wars for profit engaged in by criminals who have manipulated governmental services corporations behind the scenes and pulled off an illusion of authority that neither the federal United States nor the various federal corporations possess. Our armed forces have been commandeered to operate as commercial mercenary forces in the thrall of private business interests, and we have been paying for, staffing, funding, and supporting this circumstance, and we have been extorted and fleeced and imprisoned by our employees when we objected. Enough of all this nonsense. Every American with eyes, ears, a nose, every American with eyes, ears, nose, and a brain needs to come forward and tip off the other Americans, all Americans. This has been foisted off on us primarily by the British government and the city-state of Westminster, the Crown Temple, and the Lords of the Admiralty. The popes from 1845 to 2009, Benedict the 16th and Francis, have done the right thing, and the British monarchs are particularly to blame for this gross breach of trust and disservice and dishonorable behavior they have exhibited and permitted against Americans, Canadians, Aussies, English, Scottish, Irish, Japanese, German, and many other people throughout the world. Contrary to the British veneer of civility, they have proven to be rapacious and unrepentant predators upon the rest of humanity, and their government is monotonously at the root of all evil and violence perpetuated throughout the world. It isn't enough to say that the British government is not America's friend now or ever. The British government has not been a friend to any other nation and has raped and pillaged its own people for the better part of 3 centuries. The Brits are always at the bottom of the dog pile when one searches diligently for the source of the discord and violence, and there will there they will secretively remain until we and all the other people on earth recognize the problem and recognize it for what it is, Satan worship, which has always been identified with the jurisdiction of the sea. In pagan times, Satan was personified as Poseidon, the god of the sea, scaly tail, horns, trident, and all. Where does the great serpent lie? In the sea. Who is his henchman? The Leviathan. It is all clear enough. Let those with eyes see. Some of those who live in the jurisdiction of the sea still worship the god of the sea. Many of the complaints of child molestation, ritual sacrifice, and related crimes bear this out, because these things were all part and parcel to the worship of the satanic mystery Babylon cult, and always have been. Worship of Poseidon / Satan / the god of the sea is always in tandem with the worship of his consorts Semiramis, Isis, and Sybil. Semiramis is a Babylonian goddess famous for promoting idolatry, harlotry, and all the abominations of the earth, portrayed as a naked fertility goddess with rays of light coming out of her head, just like the Statue of Liberty, just like the Columbia Pictures icon. Columbia, goddess of democracy. Isis is just the Egyptian version of Semiramis. So why, you must ask, are we being conned to believe in a supposedly Muslim terrorist organization named ISIS? Obviously, no Muslim in his right mind is going to join or support an organization named after a Babylonian Egyptian fertility goddess. It's absurd and obviously true. Any group calling itself ISIS is satanic in nature, and its members are Satanists, not Muslims. Yet not a single member of the American Press Corps is raising their hand to ask WTF. This is because American media is absolutely controlled across the board by 6 multinational media conglomerates, all of them foreign and all but one run by Satanists. We Americans have made every mistake there is to be made. We've been asleep at the wheel like Rip Van Winkle. We've been chumps, marks, idiot savants. We've been sheep, goats, cattle, and everything else for these vampire-like and evil men, the Rockefellers and Rothschilds and the rest of the bankers and the members of Congress and the members of the American military who have stood around with their thumbs up their rectums and played host to this. It's all true, it's all known, it's all verified, no doubt about it whatsoever. But we can wake up. Earth to sleeping giant, wake up. Pass the word. These brief pages encapsulate just about all that a thinking, breathing American needs to know about the present situation and the history and the who's who of it. This information provides plenty of information and references you can research for yourself, and you are fully encouraged to dig. Bring more of the pieces of the puzzle forward and nail it down. The house is built. Now all we are doing is finishing the paint. It's because other Americans before you have researched and dug and worked hideous long hours under conditions of threat, often going hungry, being ridiculed, losing their homes, suffering imprisonment, or in too many cases being murdered outright, that you have this document in your hand. While everyone else slept, groups of Americans all over this country were awake and alarmed and working feverishly to uncover their piece of the puzzle. Now it has finally come together. You have this thumbnail version handed to you for free. Honor the sacrifice, do your due diligence, and then come forward. This is your country, your nation states. Expose the rats, denounce the fraud, gather your brethren together, explain it all. There will be no great need to prove that you have all been victims of this con game. You all remember when you were told that you had to sign up for Social Security in order to have a job in America. A big, fat lie. You all remember when the vampires came and snatched your children at the hospitals, forcing you to sign paperwork that they never explained, but which handed over ownership of your children as chattel belonging to a foreign for-profit corporation. You remember being forced to get a license to travel in your own car from point A to point B, and another license to get married. A license is official permission to do something that is otherwise illegal. Illegal to travel, illegal to marry, because you and your family are being mistaken as prisoners of war and enemy combatants in a war that ended 150 years ago. You are being administered under martial law that doesn't pertain to you and which has never pertained to you and yours, and it's all because some criminal elements in the banking industry committed the fraud of all time against you and every other American because the members of the criminal Congress have refused to declare peace. They have promoted and prolonged and advocated war for profit because themselves and their banker buddies at your expense for 100 they've promoted and prolonged and advocated war for profit for themselves and their banker buddies at your expense for 150 years, and they claim that they, quote, represent you. Do they? Maybe it's time you let them know that they don't represent you, and that if they don't do their job and declare peace, they will never represent you. They might represent Jacob Rothschild, and they might represent David Rockefeller, and they might represent Queen Mabe, I don't know what that is. But they do not, and they never will, they will never represent you. Because of that fact, you are under no obligation to pay them a brass farthing ever again. They want to securitize you? Well, Johnny, maybe it's time to securitize them. Seize their assets, nationalize their holdings, lock down the golden boys of Wall Street tighter than 10 penny drums, and arrest the judges that are sitting as impostors on your bench if they won't admit the truth and play ball and open up the public court that the people of this country are owed. Just do it. Order the clerk and the bailiff to arrest that man as an impostor, charge him with impersonating a judge of the continental United States, specifically the blank state, such as Colorado State Court or Iowa State Court. Explain these facts to the local sheriff and his deputies, to the local provost marshal and the judges and the court clerks and the members of your state legislature. Ask them which county and which state they represent. Explain this to some of the lawyers that you know who have been so proud to carry a bar association card. Ask them why they are putting up with this and betraying their own families, friends, and neighbors. Why are they working for the federal United States when they could just as easily work for the continental United States? All they have to do is tear up their bar card and forswear the title of Esquire. Whoopee ding dong, right? Stop being attorneys at law and start being attorneys in law. The bar associations have operated as closed union shops for 3 generations and gotten away with fleecing their members and demanding that lawyers go along with this fraud and keep silent about it, or be threatened with fines, disbarment, abuse from judges, or worse. If the American Bar Association and the state bar associations won't listen to reason and come to heel, it's time to outlaw them. They have all functioned as criminal syndicates on our shores and in violation of the treaties that allowed them to operate here at all. American lawyers are the ones who should be leading the pack and bringing this destruction to an end. They should be burning their bar cards like feminists burn bras if they want any credibility or respect as advocates of the rule of law. With or without a bar card, they have every right to use our court buildings and facilities and to operate our lawful public courts. They are completely competent to set up their own fraternal organizations that don't worship Satan, tell lies, and commit crime in the sanctuary of a courtroom. Start the ball rolling now. Read this and over 800 other essays on AnnaVonRights.com. Give generously via PayPal. You spell it ANNAVONREITZ.com. 48.
48.
If you understand nothing else ever, understand this. Reading from AnnaVonRights.com. Unincorporated equals sovereign. Unincorporated equals sovereign. Unincorporated equals sovereign. Here are the niceties. A man is not a name. A name is a person. A man is naturally unincorporated and sovereign in nature. He does not depend on recognition or written charters or agreements for his existence. He does not even have a name when he starts out. And when he acquires a name after being born, that name is corporate but not incorporated. A given name is a trade name operating within the international land jurisdiction. John Mark Doe, styled as upper and lower case, is a person that belongs to one of the people. It is a possession or gift given to us by our parents, just like a bicycle or a hope chest. Such a name is corporate but not incorporated. For example, we often see business names like Fletcher and Sons and Bo Peep's Sheep Yarns and that are not incorporated entities. These small businesses are corporate fictional entities, but they are not chartered by any government or parent corporation, receive no special privileges, are not franchises, and owe nobody but their owners for their existence. In the same way, John Mark Doe, styled as upper and lower case, is a fictional entity apart from the man who uses it. The name is not the man, so it is corporate, but since he is not chartered by any government or parent corporation, receives no special privileges, isn't a franchise, and owes nobody but God and his parents for his existence, he is not incorporated. The trade name, like the living man, is unincorporated and sovereign. This same rule applies to all businesses and trade organizations that are corporate but not incorporated. Thus, Santa Clara County unincorporated is a sovereign entity. It's corporate in that it is fictional but isn't incorporated. It does not owe its existence to some other entity and is not receiving its right to exist or any other special privileges from any other entity. It operates on the land and soil of California unincorporated, which is also a sovereign entity. Sovereign states and counties can't go bankrupt, have no corporate veil to protect stockholders, and don't receive any special benefits or privileges, like the ability to go bankrupt, from any sponsoring organization or parent corporation. The county of Santa Clara and the state of California are totally different. Non-sovereign incorporated franchises of territorial United States corporations, they're like Dairy Queen or Burger King franchises. They all operate under constitutions that comply with the Constitution of the United States of America. They all receive privileges from and operating capital from parent corporations that sponsor them and which are responsible for their existence and for granting them privileges. So, when a state like California incorporates and forms a state of California territorial franchise or a state of California, styled as all caps, municipal franchise, it loses its sovereignty and devolves into being equivalent to any other incorporated entity. It's no different than PJ Mudd's Barbecue Incorporated or JCPenney Incorporated. This is underlined and confirmed by the Clearfield Doctrine. California unincorporated functions in the capacity of a sovereign state. Santa Clara County unincorporated functions in the capacity of a sovereign county. State of California is just a local incorporated franchise of the territorial USA Inc. State of California, styled as all caps, is a local incorporated franchise of the municipal United States Inc., styled as all caps. County of Santa Clara is just a franchise, the state of California. These all function in the capacity of incorporated franchise that owe their existence to and receive privileges from foreign governments and foreign parent corporations. Think in terms of the French chartered Target Incorporated stores that dote the landscape. These are all foreign corporations. They are all incorporated franchise of the parent corporation Target International Incorporated. So ask yourselves, how could you be subject to the rules imposed by a Target store? Because in essence, that is the nature of the state of California and state of California too. They're all local incorporated franchises of foreign parent corporations, just like Target. If you're employed by Target, you obviously have to follow its corporate policies, wear its uniforms, etc. If you volunteer to enter a Target store, you do have to follow their rules inside the store too, or their private security guards will keep you from running up and down the escalators. It's no different, folks, except these foreign commercial corporate franchises have bamboozled you into thinking that they are and that they represent the actual California state, when all they really are is an incorporated business providing government services. Ask yourself what happens when you organize your unincorporated counties and your unincorporated states, which are all sovereign entities. And so then we get back to the actual states and the actual people and the law of the land. This is the missing link. This is where the power lies, in being unincorporated. Unincorporated equals sovereign. See this article and over 800 others on his website at annavonreitz.com. and support her work via PayPal. And getting back to this idea that we are owed the law of the land, and that somehow is related to our name. We are all, regardless of all this legal chicanery that's gone on, we are and always have been unincorporated and sovereign. A man is not a name. How can a man be a name? You do have and use a name, but perhaps you are using your given name, which is just a gift from your mom and dad, not necessarily a legal name. A legal name is an unauthorized derivative of your given name, and this is done through the birth certificate. In one instance, it's done through the birth certificate, and then throughout your life, lots of unauthorized derivatives of your given name are created for you. But the truth is, if you're not aware of what's going on, if you don't know about this, it doesn't change your nature. You don't become something that you didn't agree to and never were. But it's really useful to understand that these names are being used against you to create joinder, to basically make you liable for the debts of these incorporated entities. If we look at the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 7, firstly, understanding that the law of the land is built on the Holy Scriptures and the King James Version of the Bible. The book of Genesis says that the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So creating an incorporated entity after your given name doesn't change this fact that you are, underneath it all, a living soul. What's happened is, by the crime of unlawful conversion, converting a man, which is a created being, into a thing, and then using that unauthorized derivative against you, has changed the jurisdiction that you come under, because your name has been converted into a corporate entity, an incorporated entity. Then you come under a different jurisdiction. So how do you get that jurisdiction back? How do you go back to coming under the law of the land? Well, first of all, of course, you have to understand where you came from, who created you. I am a created being, become a soul. My only allegiance is to my Father, who breathed the breath of life into me. The laws I'm obliged to obey are given by his commandments, and the greatest of these is love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. On September 9th, 1776, our unincorporated body politic took the name United States of America and built organic and public laws around the concept coming out of the Reformation known as sola scriptura. Our laws were and continue to be the outworking of God's holy word, the Holy Scriptures, the Old and New Testaments, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. American common law is the proper law form for any practicing Jew or Christian, just as Sharia law is the proper law form for a practicing Muslim, and the Roman civil law or the civil code is and always has been the proper law form for any practicing humanist or atheist. To force a man into a law form other than the form that comports with his beliefs, and these are his religious beliefs, the beliefs of his moral code, where he came from, who created him. If you try to force the Muslim to practice common law, or force a humanist to practice Sharia law, or anyway, cross jurisdictions, you're violating his religious liberty. And so I think this argument can be made, that you know who you are, you know where you came from, you know that you're a created being, and all you really know is that you are man, that you go by a name, it's your given name, your mom and dad gave you this name, and any other unauthorized, unlawful derivatives were done via a process of some kind of institutionalized identity theft, and you are under no obligation to use any of those legal names.